Hello and welcome to episode 72 of the Sean McGuinness podcast. I hope you're all well. Friday afternoon here as I record this, just back from jiu-jitsu. And what else is going on here? Me and Louise and I are finally going to walk down the aisle in January. And that is the aisle of a plane, because we're going travelling finally after 2 years. Doing our yearly commute to all the countries of our birth, England, Ireland, and Louise has a grandmother in Poland. She's half Polish, so we will go to Poland as well. Currently brushing up on my Polish, actually. I have my Polish book here beside me. Mówię po polsku, so we're slowly learning that. Nice little goal. Third hardest language for English speakers to learn, FYI. But yes, nice little challenge that. Other than that, we'll go and do some interesting courses and that while I'm away. While we're over there, I always mentor with a few people as well who are further down the line than me. But yes, other than that, I want to release a few new products which I'm excited about as well in January in the new year. So look out to that. One of which relates to what we're going to talk about today. We're going to touch on running and how kind of my updated thoughts on that after lockdown and delving in a little bit deeper. But first, I put out a post last week about chiropractors. And again, when I say this, I'm saying it's kind of like the 80-20 rule, Pareto's principle to everything. What I see, there's 80%, you can say 80% of trainers are probably brutal, and then there's the outliers, and 20%. What I'm going to talk about, most industries the same. Well, like, most industries I see, hopefully not most fucking surgeons, where it's only 20% of people are good. For some reason, like physios, trainers, chiros, that kind of field, the majority are probably subpar, and that's probably down to regulations and stuff as well. So yes, specifically for more of that health field. Obviously back pain, there could be a few definitions of that, take what you will, but it's a very common thing for people to have. Numerous different reasons. One of the more common one is people's posture, in a sense that, yes, okay, we're in a static position all day sitting down, but when we do that, certain muscles get very tight, certain muscles get very weak, and that's more of the thing that causes people problems then, because again, this is a very simplified thing, and I know people might be shouting at the screens, but from what I see, the majority of things, if we're trying to summarize it, back muscles may start to do too much work because the rest of the muscles are not doing too much, and then certain muscles be a bit tight, which pulls you into certain postures, and then again overloads the back. So people always go, my back's just weak, that's why I have a back. No, it's a lot of the time it's your back's actually the hero, and it's trying to do too much because the rest of the stuff is not doing the slack. Anyway, chiropractics is a big thing in Australia. And unfortunately, and I'm saying this because I have clients that have spent hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. When I put this post up about chiro, it was just a meme, Dr. Nick meme. I think it said, if I don't kill you, it's free. Or if I kill you, it's free. And I made a joke, I'm referring to chiropractors, because, as I said, the general premise of chiropractors was built on like more of a pseudoscience. I think the guy's name was D.D. Palmer, and he based it off adjustments, I can't remember the right term for it, kind of manual techniques, and your body's out of alignment. That's it. And he based off your body's out of alignment, and when we align your body properly, we can cure diseases and then your misalignment of your spine. That's it. Sorry, I've written down here. So the central premise is based on the belief that all ailments of the body are consequences of the misalignment of the spine. So then chiropractors have based on this belief and then go in and go, okay, your back's sore because it's out of place, or I need to adjust this or crack this. And you may see YouTube videos or Instagram videos of chiros cracking people's back and getting big noises of it. And yes, it's satisfying to watch, and it may feel satisfying in the short term. But to say, like, I'm going to fix your back problems from giving you a few cracks, like, it's absolute preposterous. There's no science to that at all. When someone cracks your back, it's just basically gas leaving. So synovial fluid is full of dissolved gas, and when the joints of the spine are open in a rapid movement, it creates a vacuum in the joint, and it's just like air and gas, and that's the thing making a noise. And yes, in the very short term, I think because in the joints, no, from my understanding, you may have like built up pressure, and then when you crack it, it's kind of releasing that gas, releasing that pressure. So in the very short term, yes, can feel satisfying, and I think that's where people get into this. But if we look at the makeup of a body, your spine doesn't hold itself up. It's being held up by the tissue around it. Muscles, ligaments, tendons, all the musculoskeletal system, your fascia that surrounds your muscles. And unfortunately, people have the belief that if my back's sore, I need to go and get adjusted or cracked, and that's just bullshit. Yes, placebo comes into play here, but that's just playing the small percentages. What people need to do, okay, if you want to get your back cracked, that's fine. I have some clients at the end of the session, I'll stretch them and I'll do a little rotation and they'll back crack and they'll feel better, but that just adds to kind of that endorphin after. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that per se. I don't think it leads to like arthritis, from my understanding, when you crack your joints. But what I'm trying to say is, don't go in with the belief that if you get cracked and adjusted, your back's going to be better. You have to look at the root cause of the problem. And speaking of the principle 80-20, I've actually just finished one of Dave O'Sullivan's courses last week, who is a brilliant physio. I think he's the England rugby physio at the moment, teaches other physios, but he has the 80-20 principle, and he looks at it in relation to, okay, 20% we may give that person short-term relief, okay, some desensitization, and if you want to put chiropractor in there and someone's cracking you, give you a little bit short-term relief, I don't have a problem with that. But the 80% of the time needs to be spent on actually looking at the root cause of your back pain. What's going on? Is your back trying to do too much because your hamstrings, your glutes, your core, again, general terms, but that's what people understand, and not doing too much work. Again, when we sit down, in a sense, quote unquote, your glutes may switch off or not do as much work because we're not using them. We don't really use them when we walk or sit. It needs to be in the gym or when we sprint or when we run, you're going to use more glutes. And so because these supporting muscles are not doing the job, your back has to do more work. Or when you're sitting down, you may be getting signals, you may be getting little pain sensors that your back's just telling you, look, we're actually doing too much here. And that's going to give you that sensation of discomfort. Again, pain's multifactorial, but in very simple terms, this is what I see a lot. So if you wanted to, you go, oh, my chiro's great. My chiro's great, I've been seeing him for 10 years. Yeah, but you're still in pain. Like, but if as I'm saying, if you wanted to use some short-term relief, but then you have to add on to movement, exercise. You need to be strengthening the muscles up that are going to support everything and take the pressure off. I had a client who came back to me yesterday after 4 months in lockdown, and up to that point, he had bad back problems, bad neck problems. During lockdown, he said he was having the worst time. All his neck problems are coming back. He's couldn't sleep on that side, tingles down his arms, his back was just messed up. One of the reasons that can happen is because we're not stimulating those supporting muscles and giving them right. And if you're not stimulating the supporting muscles and making them work, your body will compensate and find other movement patterns, which then may result in certain muscles doing too much work, and then that can result in you having a sensation of pain or discomfort or whatever it is. So think about posture, not in the sense that you can just stand up straight with your shoulders back, but in the sense that there's a posture called sway back posture, and where people's hips are forward and they're kind of slunched over, and that's a compensatory pattern because muscles are not doing too much work, so your body finds the path of least resistance to carry itself, and obviously after a while that can lead to discomfort. So my point is, in a long-winded answer, backing, cracking, putting your hips back into place. If people tell you that, they're just looking for the cashish, and they're going to try it, and they'll probably go, well, you need to come back and see me every week, twice a week, 3 times. Just trying to rip you off. If you don't get any homework and you're not getting any exercise and movement prescription with that to be able to look at the root cause, or even then, I'm going to backtrack even on that point, where Dave O'Sullivan talks about his 80-20 rule in regards to looking for the root cause of your back pain. It could be like that's where you would take someone's injury history, or a good physio would, and it could be a case that, okay, just like we established, your body will find the path of least resistance when it's moving and walking around, and it's going to compensate, and those compensations over time can then lead to certain muscles doing too much and certain muscles not doing enough. So your old sprained ankle could lead to you walking a certain way, okay? And then that walk in a certain way, because when you land, you're not absorbing the force properly. We're going to talk about this when we run. So, but in the short term, that's going to help you move around. But in the long term, that could be causing discomfort up the chain. So when you walk, if you've changed the movement pattern of walk, okay, then you may not be using certain muscles properly, and then your back may be acting like shock absorbers. So in that case, okay, we need to look at your whole injury history, and we need to look, okay, your back pain could be caused from this. Let's test your ankle. Let's see if that's moving. Okay, we know that's going to be the root cause. Well, if we fix this, well, everything else works. So that should be the mentality to empower you to look at your injuries, look at the root cause. It's not just a matter of looking at that area. There's a guy, I can't remember, it's off the top of my head, where his thing is stop chasing pain. Like, just because the area of pain, whether it's your knee, doesn't necessarily mean your knee's weak, but there's something else not working, causing your knee to potentially be overloaded, or the same with your shoulder, etc., etc. So that is my thoughts on that. Now, as I said, there's always outliers. I do know some good chiropractors, but they have educated themselves in the musculoskeletal field, and when you go in and get a treatment from them, they'll understand the muscles and tissues, and so they're not just going to crack your back. Okay, they're going to release certain muscles that may be tight, give you exercises then, or work with a trainer, work with a physio, whatever it is, to be able to solve that problem. So I know I talked to one, he's on George Street. He did a lot of trainers, and again, he had to go on his own journey the same way, because he wasn't curing people, but that was the starting point for him. But yes, this is how you should empower yourself. Just because you feel better short term, and you can kind of get someone to feel better short term in a sense, but you need to be solving these issues long term, whether you're going to physios, chiros, trainers. That should be the thought pattern around that. So that's just my thoughts on that. I'm not having to dig at anyone, but it's more, I just really hate people getting ripped off. Especially, again, you can be fooled, as I said, at that when you feel better, you're like, well, the person made me feel better, so I need to keep going back to them. And there's some shitty people around, as well as some good people. Unfortunately, sometimes the shitty people take advantage of that goodwill, and then again, this is a generalization. There are people maybe more prone to kind of getting ripped off because they're more invested and they're a bit more pain aware of what's going on. So that is my thoughts on that. If you disagree, feel free to message me. Obviously, always happy to have an open discussion if there's anything you disagree with. Okay, and then that brings me on to my second point, and it's something I've changed my stance on a little. I'll tune on a little. During lockdown, it's been a good time for me to, as I said, I've been mentoring with one of my colleagues, Nigel, who's probably the best physio I know. Ironically, has the different ethos to quote unquote fixing people, whereas some physios or chorus, whatever it is, they work off you coming back. So do they want to fix you completely? Leave that up to you. He works off the premise so he'll like get you better as quick as possible, and then you'll probably tell 10 of your friends how unbelievable he is, and then that's how he gets busy. So that's more of the ethos I align with. Anyway, I've been mentoring with him, and he's been sending me papers to research and educate myself and upskill on this area. And one of the things we got into, I think he sent me a course. The guy's name's Dr. Daniel Lieberman, and he is an evolutionary biologist or evolutionary anthropologist from Harvard, and he has some books on, I think they're called Born to Run. There's a few people that have books Born to Run. Christopher McGonagall, I think that it's the same circle. Their theory is that looking at the human structure, we've evolved in a way that a lot of the ligaments and the way our foot's lined up, in a way that we've evolved to run. And then he equates it back to we are, what is the word? I've written it down because I always butcher this. Persistence hunters. So before they... And anytime you're talking about evolutionary biology or psychology, it's always theory. We don't know for certain, but it's one that makes sense. So he theorized, looking back, that I think he said like tools and swords and knives, whatever, to kill animals have only been invented in the recent 10,000, 100,000 years. But before that, we're like, right, well, how did we kill animals without that? And he talks of persistence hunting and the fact that animals obviously so fast. I think he says a squirrel can outrun, like, is quicker than Usain Bolt. So we're not really made for speed, but we're made for maybe running longer distances. Animals don't have the ability to sweat like humans do. They need to stop. And I think, like, so for example, dogs, when you see them panting, that's how they sweat. Don't ask me the mechanism, I can't remember the top of my head, but just take my word for it. When they stop, they pant, and then that's how they screech or cool themselves down. But they can't cool themselves while they run. Humans obviously can. We develop sweat glands, and if anyone's trained hard, you know you can cool yourself down while we move around and exercise, or in this case, not really exercise, but run for the sake of getting some dinner. So persistence hunting is you would run after, and obviously it's going to outrun you, whether it's zebra or wildebeest, it's going to outrun you. But right when you see it slow down, you would run again and try to make it run, and over time, 20 minutes, half an hour, it would just collapse from heat exhaustion, and then we'd pounce in. So it's kind of this combination of run, walk to eventually just persistently hunt the animal, and that's, they theorized how we got fed, and obviously it worked because we're still here and you're listening to this on a podcast. So thank you for all those smart hunters and brave hunters. And yes, and then he also looked at kind of the way our structure is in regards to Achilles tendon and the foot, the way we push off when we can run and absorb force. And his theory is that, like when we run and this lined up with some stuff I've read recently as well, that when we run, our bodies are a relatively good shock absorber, and we can do it properly and safely. My issue with running before was when I see very overweight people run because they think that's the best way to lose weight. And it's kind of that risk to reward, that obviously when you're overweight, you have a higher level of, you've more weight to carry, so that there's a potentially higher level of joint stress, which may, in combination with kind of weaker muscles, if they're not conditioned, may give you issues with ankles, knees, or hips, or whatever it is. So my stance on before as well, just lower the risk for a higher reward, and just go on a piece of cardio if you want to burn calories that's gonna be without that joint stress. Bikes, rowers, swimming, more brisk walking if needs be. That was my stance. My bias then from looking at people run around the park, what they're trying to run, and I could see them not running properly. They might be like running around like a penguin with their toes are out and running with knee straps on, and then you hear all these stories of people who ran in their early 20s and 30s and then butchered their knees later in life. Okay, so I thought, well, okay, it's obviously higher level stress. But in a roundabout way, my stance on it now from what I've seen is that when it's done properly, it's actually pretty good, and it can be beneficial for a lot of reasons that we will talk about. So I suppose it's kind of like weight training. It's like when you do it properly, brilliant. When you don't do it properly, potentially injury causing. And that's the same way with running. So what I've done is I've put together some little checkpoints, and from dealing with a lot of people like to run. Whether that's getting outside, sunshine, fresh air, nature, a combination of all those things and being able to do that. Maybe you just want the option of running. The bus is there. I want to be able to run if I need to. Someone's chasing me, I need to be able to run and not get injured. So my thoughts on it now, as I said, is there's a checklist that we need to tick off, and it kind of brings me to the point. One of the products that I'm going to release in the new year is a return to running guide, because when I think of running, I think of a negative bias with it because it's done so badly in that regards, that people who are deconditioned jump up off the couch and try to run straight into it and then butcher themselves and not get any benefit, and then kaput, or they injure themselves or just give up. And it's very interesting looking at the body. As I said, when we do it properly, your body absorbs force nicely when we push and when we land on the right spots, which you're going to talk about in the technique kind of section of it. And if we equate to kind of that runner's high which people get, which we'll touch on that as well, the evolutionary kind of biologist Dr. Daniel Lieberman talks about it because it's so ingrained, he thinks, in kind of who we are. When we run, or especially when we exercise, run in groups, we're tying into that social cues of basically the DNA of who humans are. And there's no better group to see that. As I said, there's a park across here with cyclists. That kind of develops into kind of a cult following. Daniel Lieberman talks about how we've never really exercised voluntarily. We've evolved in a way to really hold on to our energy. We don't want to expend it because we don't know when we're going to eat again. So he theorizes that we only exercise or move around for two reasons: for purpose or for play, social aspects. So for purpose, you're on a mission, you're going somewhere, you're getting your dinner, you're going to hunt this animal. Or then for play, which ties back into the social aspect of, then we look at activities that encompass this, do very well, because suddenly we're in a group and it's much easier, it's much more quote unquote natural. When I see cyclists, okay, there's some pitfalls to that, but there's also some brilliant things with that. When I see them going for rides, going cycling, that is. And then they'll go and they'll sit down, they'll have coffee. So there's obviously something ingrained, and we can see that in CrossFit, we can see it in all these other avenues. So running's no different. When I see people running groups, you're like, whoa, it's kind of brings you back to what it gives you an idea of what it would have been like, where we're running in tribes, we're doing it together, and that ingrains some of the more good chemicals in the brain that are going to be released when we do that. So yeah, we want to give someone the option to be able to do that. And obviously, again, one of the benefits, so easily accessible to be able to do, which kind of my thought process, I don't want to, one of the reasons I looked into it, I'm like, okay, I know I need people to burn a bit more calories, but I can't necessarily be telling them to go to the gym all the time to be able to do this. Yes, it's okay if you're single, whatever, but for the people that have families and that are in the office all day and that they don't want to go to the gym and spend time indoors, I need to get that person out in the sun, fresh air, so I can empower them with the ability to be able to run. Perfect. Now I've just empowered that person, and that's another kind of string to the bow which they can use to burn some more calories and lose weight or maintain that weight loss as well. So just going on to the little checklist I have, and we can discuss this. We need to take these things off before, especially because people are so deconditioned, as I said, or have previous injuries, whatever it is. Number one, we need adequate foot mechanics. Now, when I got Dr. Emily Shippel on, who's one of the world leading podiatrists, go back and listen to that episode if you can, because that summarizes what I'm about to say way better. She goes into detail on all these things. This is just a really simplified view. So obviously, if we think of foot mechanics, our feet are the first things, obviously, our base of support. So if we think of good posture, we always look at our back and our upper body, but we rarely think of good posture when it comes to our feet. I'm doing this on video, so if you can't just imagine it, she talks of adequate posture being a tripod foot. So we have a nice even weight distribution. We have our big toe, little toe touching the ground. We have a weight through our heel, and then we have some room under our arch there if needs be. If you were looking at someone from the back, or you can do this where you take a picture of kind of where your heels are, your calcaneus and your Achilles that runs up that. We kind of want a straight line from the name escapes me off the top of my head what they refer to that as. But just think of your Achilles, the line your Achilles has. Ideally, you want a straight line down to your heel. If someone is overpronated, or a common term, collapsed arches, they will have no arch in their foot, or very minimal or not enough. And if you look at them from behind, they're going to have a collapsed kind of Achilles inwards. That line's not going to be straight. Obviously, then if someone's over supinated, where they're walking more on the outside of the foot and the big toe isn't really touching the ground, that line is going to be more of a kind of semicircle that way. So that's the best way to judge it. So we want nice foot posture. There's a lot I want to cover within the foot posture, but I'm just trying to think of how just to keep it as simplified as possible so I don't ramble on. I think overpronation is probably more of a common thing, where people have kind of collapsed feet inwards. And this could be down to many, many reasons. This could be down to weakness at your hips. It's kind of a chicken and egg scenario. Sometimes the muscles above are weaker, so that's causing a collapse inwards. So everything needs to be worked together. If you're worried, go see a good functional podiatrist that understands your foot but understands everything else around it, or good physio as well, if you really want to look into it a little bit more. If you're more overpronated from a foot point of view, and again, go back and listen to Dr. Emily episode. You may need to focus, and it's probably a good thing people add in anyway, to feet training, and I'll do some videos in future in time, but you may need to look at kind of strengthening your tibialis post, tibialis anterior. Those are the muscles that kind of hold those arches up, among many things. But go get that looked at if you want to get back in, because that's my first protocol. Because a lot of people are overpronated, shoe companies then have made these shoes that have real high arches to kind of compensate for that as well. But the problem when we go too much one way, when we run, we still want we want some pronation. So that's kind of when if you're landing, your feet are going to come inward slightly, and you might push off more of your big toe. Again, it's easy to demonstrate this if you watch the video. But if then we're wearing shoes where we're then the opposite of overpronate, but the opposite, we're walking more on the outside, we have too much support, well, that can be troublesome as well. And Dr. Emily talks about a lot of foot issues, especially being down to modern shoes, kind of ruining our foot mechanics. We need to be barefoot for those muscles to be able to work properly. If we're constantly in shoes that are giving us a lot of support, those foot muscles not working properly. So again, we need those muscles strong to be able to hold up our arch properly, and then to be able to load them when we run or walk. When we land, running shoes, again, a massive topic, but just put briefly on this as well. That's why if you haven't heard from it, barefoot running has kind of come to a more frontier, because these people theorize that, Dr. Emily talks of some studies where they've done on it, where we look at running shoes, they have a really big cushion, especially at the heel. So one of the ways our brain senses where we are in space, obviously our feet are touching the ground. Then when we run or when we jump, we have a better ability to be able to judge how to absorb that force. When we're in really high cushion shoes, we actually hit the ground harder. So it's actually, she says, it's a higher force going through our joints because we're landing too hard. Your foot needs to be in contact with the ground, and when we're in these big shoes, your foot is trying to crash to the ground harder, and we're not aware of how to absorb that force properly. Modern shoes, especially running shoes, are also giving people the false hope of, because there's a lot of cushion in the heel, it's then encouraging more heel striking when we land. Again, this is what's being theorized. One of the ways we need to run, and we'll touch on this in the technique bit, is the midfoot hits the ground. So you think of your ball of your foot. That forces your Achilles, your lower calf, I think a little bit your upper calf, and your hamstrings as well to absorb that force. But I think especially your Achilles and your soleus, your lower calf, to be able to absorb that, kind of eccentrically absorb that force. And then if you're jogging, your heel might then kiss the ground after, and then that propels you forward. Versus if you land on your heel, well, try to jump and land on your heel barefoot. You would never do that. You would always land on your midfoot and absorb that force. When we're landing for a heel, well, suddenly that may place extra stress on like your shins. Could lead to shin splints, knee pain. Normally when people heel strike, they'll overstride as well. So when we overstride, it's further giving us problems in regards to absorbing that force. So that is the first thing we want to look at. Also tying into adequate foot mechanics is adequate big toe. So your big toe, we want a certain amount of being able to bring it upwards. Big toe extension, it's called. So if you sat there, think of and this will tie back into more the proprioception around your feet and the muscles, which is why now, especially I throw some footwork, feet work, and feet proprioception work, whether that's into the warm-ups or obviously trying to encourage people, if they don't have major like overpronations, whatever, okay, you need to see someone, because as she said, if it's been there for too long, that structure may calcify a little bit and then may become just too hard to fix if it's been there long term. But we need a certain amount of big toe extension, because when we push off in gait or even walking, we need to be able to point that toe, plantar flex, and push off that big toe. A lot of weight's going to go for a big toe, and then that works up the chain to engage your right calf muscles, your right quads, and then your right glutes, those glutes muscles if you're working. So even why there's some studies now where I talked a little bit before about how random injuries, sprained ankles, and always people come in and I go, okay, list me your injuries, blah 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 blah. Then we'll go on the gym floor and I'll see, look, that foot doesn't look right. If you've done anything like, oh, you have sprained that 10 times. Okay, that's fucking, you need to be telling me before. There's been studies where ankle sprains then have been tied to less glute function later on. So we're starting to compensate and use different movement patterns. So if someone, my dad for example, had an injury and over time he started to walk on the outside of his foot, and then because he's not, there's 52 I think muscle bone, 33 bones in a foot, if I'm saying that correctly. Obviously that when we walk, if you can think of walking barefoot, we're going through a full movement where we land on kind of the outside of the heel, land in a supinated position. Our foot's going to flatten to what's called more pronated position, and we're going to push off and walk. If we're not moving that foot through a full range of motion and getting those bones and muscles and all the tissues in your foot moving, well, over time they're just they won't move and they're going to form, and then maybe that over time, that structure, because you're not moving those bones around, that becomes something that then structurally stays. So bone spurs might form in it. So my dad, because he's been walking a certain way for so long, I said, okay, take your shoes off. This was after we'd done heaps of legs and hips, and it just wasn't still looking right. Looked at his foot, and I looked at his big toe, and he had no extension in his big toe. And then again, that's a chicken and egg scenario. So if you can't lift your big toe up a certain way, you won't push off there when you walk, and so you're going to have to compensate. Whether it's common why then people may turn the feet out in kind of a penguin thing, because they're not pushing off properly, and then the body's finding ways of moving. So yeah, what I was saying before I interrupted myself and went on a tangent, where you are now, keep your four little toes down and try to lift your big toe up. Okay, so push your 4 little toes into the ground and lift your big toe up. First of all, you should be able to do that. Obviously, a lot of people can't, because we lose the proprioception, because maybe we're not training enough without shoes or walking around enough without shoes. We lose that proprioception, the kind of muscle-mind connection in itself. And then secondly, you should be able to achieve 45 to 55 degrees, I think it is. So, and if you can't, if it's been there really long, I think it can form into like arthritis. But again, go see someone if you're concerned with that. I know my dad's when I did some little joint mobilizations where I moved the joint around in his big toe, and man, you should have heard the cracking. Like I said at the start, it's not that it's going to fix it, but it's just been away for such a long time. So I've given him some big toe stretches where if you have like a plate, put your big toe on the plate and put the other 4 toes on the ground, and then you may start to push your knee forward and get some movement there. Or the table of a desk, which I'm doing now. Put your big toe against it, put the 4 toes down, and then just push the weight forward so you get more moving, and then you can monitor that. So that again may not have thought in regards to foot mechanics and what we need, but that's the first base. So in my running program, I have kind of accounted for that. Obviously individualization is key, but I've kind of accounted as best I can for that and put some footwork in, because that's the first base of support. So obviously you can't, for a cannon from a canoe, it's going to be too unstable, so we need that in order. Second, which relates to that, is adequate dorsiflexion. So dorsiflexion is basically ankle range of motion. So how far you can push your shin bone forward of your ankle. If you want to test what adequate dorsiflexion is for you, and obviously that we need that to be able to absorb the force when we land and then push off properly. So we need around 10 centimeters. If you just Google a knee to wall test, we need around 10 centimeters. So in kind of a lunge position, you should be able to bring your front foot back 10 centimeters from the wall, keeping your heel down, and then your shin traveling over your first 2 toes to be able to touch the wall. Then if you don't have that range, you may look at if, again, very generalization, but if you feel more tightness in the back where your Achilles, your calf muscles are, you may then look at like releasing those muscles, foam rolling, release, then stretch it each time, and then retest after a few weeks. If you feel more pinching at the front of the joint, again, could be something more serious that you need to see someone about. But in general terms, and when I say, don't sue me, just I'm giving you guidelines, because when I listen to the podcast, I like to have some kind of takeaways. I don't want to always say it depends. I'm going to give you some starting points. If you feel a pinching sensation more in that talus joint, you could use some traction drills where you're probably seeing people, you put a band around that, so the band's pulling you backwards, and then you'll do a calf stretch from there. So it tractions the joint and allows you to get a little bit more range. So some people could be restricted at the front from that joint issue. Some people could be restricted from the back and more of that muscular calf. So just go for the second one, Google banded calf stretch, banded lower calf stretch, banded traction lower calf stretch. I think I have on my Instagram, but you probably have to scroll down too long. But yes, and that's something we need for that. The next, we have talked before about how important those Achilles and lower calf muscles are, especially for like force absorption. Well, the problem is that when people get back into running, and which is going to be in one of the mistakes people made, and we round it off nicely, is we need to condition those muscles. So we need good strength in those muscles, but we also need good kind of endurance and conditioning in those muscles. So it's why when I'm going to talk about some protocols, how to go back into it, I'll use like walk-run protocols where you slowly condition. The worst thing people do is they get straight up from the couch, bang, I'm going to do a 5-10k. Well, those muscles aren't conditioned to be able to constantly absorb that force and push off. So it's so easy to wear them down, or because they're not conditioned enough, when those muscles get like more tired, they're not going to absorb the force properly, then that potentially could be higher force going through the upper parts of your leg. It's why encouraging my return to running thing, which I'm going to release, we'll start off with like some low level bounds where you're kind of just jumping and landing on the midfoot, and you might start with like 30 seconds. Skipping's a great thing to do to start off. Obviously don't go straight in doing 20 minutes straight, because you need to condition those, because you need to condition those things, because you're putting more force through in there when we jump and land. But something like that, like just skipping, or even just imagine you're skipping doing the rope, just bouncing off the midfoot, because not only are we trying to condition those muscles, but we're also conditioning what's called foot stiffness. So when we hit the ground, there's not too much give. If you think of like, you imagine your foot was like just really overly flexible, well then when you hit the ground, it's not going to be able to absorb that force and then kick off, or have that elastic tendencies to be able to absorb and push you off straight away. We need a stiff foot, so when we hit the ground, it stiffens up, gives a little give and push off. I know that might sound like something else, but get your brains out of the gutters. So if you're going to get back into a start with some low level bounds, some skipping bounds, you might start with like 30 seconds, 4 or 5 sets, and then you might do them at the start of each workout, each of your strength workout. And then you can build it up from there. Then you can build it up to more like single leg little bounds on one leg, 10 reps each side, and build up slowly. Go off how your recovery is. Obviously, if you're like, because you don't want to give yourself Achilles tendonitis or something if you just overuse that. You don't overuse muscles. Best way to injure yourself straight away. So ease into it really slow. Then over time you can increase the frequency of then the sets, and then make it harder that way. But that is an important one. And then obviously this brings us on to our next point in regards to what to do in the gym, because we want to be strong enough for our muscles to be able to absorb those force nicely. So obviously put lots of or put a few sets in each day of some lower calf work. Again, to make it really simple, if you think of like a seated calf raise, that's going to work more the lower part of the calf anytime the leg's bent. So you might start in that position. You may use, like, if you think of wall sits, sit against the wall, and then for holding that position, because that's going to strengthen some quads up as well. Isometrically, just holding it, which is pretty safe. It's not going to give people too much soreness, so it's a nice beginner exercise. And then from there, raise up into a calf raise. If you're on the leg press, you could keep your legs bent, kind of squat position, and then just bending your ankle back and forward and pushing off using that lower. So anytime it's bent, you're going to use more of the lower part, which, again, there's some argument, it's probably very more significant than maybe the upper part of the calf. Anytime there's obviously imbalance is going to cause problems, but it's probably best to spend a lot of time on that, especially if you're weak. Then from there, you can progress it to make it more specific to running. So picture you're in a lunge position and both legs are bent 99 degrees, and holding that lunge position, and then on the front leg you're going to push up and go into a calf raise. So everything else is going to stay in the lunge position and you're going to push up. That's going to be a bit more functional. And then from there you could do that off a step in the lunge position, just with the ball of your foot on the step, raise up and then slowly drop back down, raise up, drop down. Bent knee calf raises, then you can progress to single leg bent knee calf raises. And then maybe at the end of that, it could be, you might actually picture your lunge in that calf raise position. So now your toes pointed, your heel isn't on the ground, and then you may do lunges from that position. So your heel doesn't touch the ground, so your midfoot, your ball of your foot's touching the ground the whole time. Now you have to move while maintaining a stiff Achilles and stiff soleus, so that can condition that. Well, there's loads of ways to skin a cat. Add some upper calf work in there, so that would be when your leg's straighter. So you may just superset it when you're doing it. And then again, it's important to try get down to single leg stuff, because a lot of people have discrepancies between both legs, where when you start with doing two legs, one leg might take over. It's also why I should have added in where we talked about foot mechanics, where I said you may be pronated. Well, you could have people where one foot's pronated and the other one's supinated, as in one's collapsed in and the other you're walking on the outside, so it's not the same on both. For people like myself who's sprained their ankles a few times, and then my right one was a calf injury a year or two ago, so I spent loads of time on that, and now I'm like, well, now there's too much discrepancy. So single leg work ideally progress towards, start with double, Start with whatever's easiest for you and then progress to harder versions, more unstable versions. When we're looking in the gym, as I said, obviously running on one leg, we eventually want to get to the stage where we're doing lots of single leg exercises, lots of lunges, step ups, then progress to harder versions of those Bulgarian split squats, B stance deadlifts, and you may progress to like single leg Romanian deadlifts, and obviously start with the exercise variation that is more stable, that allows you to think the least, and then progress to potentially the least stable variation of that exercise, because then that's going to mimic running more, where you're not going to be able to hold onto a stick when you're running, and then you grain those moving patterns, you progress to that. So even what I said before, you could even start with like say for example you're trying to work the back of your legs, you may start with just back extensions. You're brand new to the gym, okay, let's just get some work in for hamstrings, glutes and lower back. Then it may progress to the stage where you can do a single leg back extension, and then you may progress to a B stance deadlift holding 2 dumbbells. Then you may progress to a B stance kettlebell holding 1 dumbbell in the opposite hand. That's going to challenge your outside hip muscles a little bit more, and then those stabilize a little bit more. Then you may progress to a single leg Romanian deadlift holding 2 dumbbells. Then you may progress to a single leg Romanian deadlift holding 1 dumbbell, etc. So that's going to mimic that. It's probably, you probably don't want to just rely on like squats and deadlifts, because again, compensations. Yes, we want to get our muscles strong, and 2-legged movements can do that, but just get a mix of both, where you still do more single leg, because they're probably quite a bit more functional for running. So say for example in a lunge position where one kind of hips forward, one's back, well that's how you run. So that's, you train those positions. And I really like single leg movements as well, because you get some mobility in that as well. So for example in a lunge or split squat, you're going to work the front leg, but then you're also loosening out the back hip muscles, which can commonly get tight for when people sit down a lot. So yes, that is my recommendations on that. And obviously lots of different core variations. If you look at like dead bug variations, anytime you are working on maintaining a stable pelvis, or stable, I'm trying to think of what's an easier way to think of it. Think of your pelvis, your hips, your back. Okay, you're on the ground. Just Google dead bug variations after this. But we want to be able to stabilize those muscles around the core and hips while we eventually move other muscles, and that's going to add to that overall aesthetic. And that's as easy as that, without demonstrating a lot of it. So good strength training program. Okay, last 2 things here. Then we have, after we have those things yourself, we can look at good technique. There's a great app which I have used, and there's a real good guy on YouTube actually. What I've looked at, his name is James Dunn, I think. Yeah, James Dunn. He's some great running videos. I think he's a physio himself, so he recommend. I bought one of his products, and he recommended this app called OnForm. And so if I have online clients or face to face, I'll video them running, and then we'll break down the technique. And again, sometimes it's down to weakness, and we can figure that out in the previous points we touched on. But then it may just be a technique issue as well. So for example, if someone's heel striking and overstriding, we can then add some running drills into, say for example, someone's running and then they're dragging their feet too much. Well, they're probably going to overstride, where when we run, we want to pick up our knee just enough, so then when our foot comes down, our foot hits the ground right under our knee and hip. And then that is going to be the most efficient mechanic, because it's landing under us. So then the weight's going backwards, that's going to be just perfect to propel us forward again. Well, you can imagine if you overstride, now your legs in front of you, you have to expend so much energy to try now overcome that leg and then go forward again. We want the most efficient movement possible. And he, in his videos, he looks at I'm putting my name today. Jacoby, I think his second name is Jacoby. He's like the fastest runner in the world. I think he did a sub 2 hour marathon. But if you look at his, and it relates back to what the evolutionary guys are talking about, when you use our mechanics the way they're supposed to, it's very economical and efficient, and you're going to save yourself a lot of energy doing those movements, because even when we walk, when we run, when we do it properly, when we look at kind of the fascial system as well that surrounds the muscles, well, when all that's happening is we are creating some tension as we step forward in the back hip, and now that's going to slingshot us forward. So it's kind of, think of a bow and arrow, you're pulling it back and then you're going to sling it forward. That's what's constantly happens when we move efficiently, properly. Same with running. When we do it properly, it's like a constant little load and spring forward of our tissues. So obviously you want good knit technique to be able to do that. And then as we talked about, when we strike with a midfoot, more of a mid strike, it's going to absorb our force properly through those right muscles, so we're not getting force absorbers up the chain. Now obviously I can't really recommend the perfect drill for you, but I like to add some drills in. You may just Google like skip variations. There's sprinting ones, but they still get you to like land on the midfoot. So like the ones where it's like high knee variations, so they're still training you to pick that knee up, and potentially some ones like heel touches, some good running drills like where you're pressing against the wall, you can bring your knee up and you can learn the position. But yeah, go do your own research into that. Some good running drills. Oh, the skip variation, there's some MAC drills, MACH, again made for sprinting, but I think they still transfer nicely over to running. Obviously sprinting, you're going to be staying on the ball for the whole time, but most people need to get used to landing on that and then landing under the knee and hip. And then the last thing, it's kind of a recommendation / a checklist, is we ease into it properly. So as I said, people think of running where they think, okay, when I'm running I can't stop until I reach the target. Well, actually that's not the right approach to be able to do it. The reason people run is they're trying to generally train their aerobic system. But if someone isn't conditioned and they go straight into running, I'm going to assume their heart rate is going to spike really high very quickly. Well, then suddenly they're out of that aerobic zone. They're not training that anymore. The aerobic zone, if you look at it from a heart point of view, aerobic zone's like your 120 to 150 beats per minute. Okay, and that's kind of, when we're doing that, we're going to get all these adaptations with our heart. Your heart's going to get stronger. Your heart's going to get better at pumping blood around. Go back to the episode where I did on aerobic training, where I explain all the fascinating adaptations. Well, in that heart rate period, why we're staying in that is we're forcing our heart to take in a maximal amount of blood, and then it's going to push that blood away. So we're filling it up as much as possible, really challenging those chambers to fill up and stretch out, and that's going to push away. And over time that increases what's called your stroke volume. So you begin to push more blood out for each beat, and then your heart doesn't have to work as hard. So then as you get fitter, one of the reasons you get lower heart rate, which is brilliant because your heart's not working as hard, it's working more efficiently. That's one of the reasons what happens in the aerobic zone. But when people go out of over 150, well, suddenly it's not only you getting more lactate buildup, but your heart has to work too hard. So if you think it's going bump, 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 so you're not given it time to fill up properly, stretch, and then excrete that blood out. So you're not going to get those right adaptations. You may still get some aerobic benefit, but you're not getting a maximum benefit. In addition, when we train at very high heart rate intensities, it's very stressful on the body. So lower heart rate zones are less stressful, so we can do them more often. So when people go out and they try to run straight away, they're going to fry themselves. Not only are their muscles not conditioned, the tendons, the ligaments are going to get mad DOMs, but from a physiological point of view, that's a very high stress you've just added. And I'm going to assume most people have a relatively high amount of stress. So we're trying to always balance that out. That's like the people that say, oh, I run from my stress. Well, it's a bit stupid, especially if you're doing it that way, because all you're doing is adding more stress. Then that could be the person that they're obituary. Oh, well, he ran every day but he died. I don't know why. But then when you look at it from a physiological point of view, you're just adding more stress onto his plate. So his body's going to shut down, his or hers. So yes, ease into it. You might use, if you're looking at heart rate zones, what I did easing back into running is run/walk, and you might run until your heart rate gets too high, so it's starting to push towards that 150, and then walk till it comes down to 120. 150 is kind of range for more, you might say, younger people. If you're a little bit older, you may stay in that bit lower intensity, 120, 130, but use the same technique what I'm talking about. So it's a run/walk, keeping your heart rate in that zone. You can also, if you want to, use certain work to rest ratio. So you may start off with like a 1 to 3 work to rest ratio. So for example, you run for 30 seconds or a minute, and then you walk for 3 minutes. You might find that's just perfect to keep your heart rate in the zone, and you may set a timer, and mentally might be a bit easier. Then as you start to get fitter, you can decrease the work to rest. So then you may work towards a 1 to 2 work to rest ratio. So you're running for a minute and you're walking for 2 minutes. Then as you go, your recovery is improving, you're getting fitter, heart rate can come down quicker. Then you might go 1 to 1, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, and then eventually be able to go 2 to 1 work to rest ratio, where you run for 2 minutes, walk for 1 minute, and then you can increase it that way over time. The best way to progress your running, people run and try, I need to hit this time, I need to beat it every week. That's not the best way. What you want to do is, first of all, when you're getting your body used to running again, just slowly increase the volume. So say, for example, you start with twice a week with this run to walk method. Instead of frying yourself now going faster on those days, you may add a third day in. Now you're increasing the volume and you're increasing the frequency of that running. Now suddenly you've just added another session in over the course of the week, which is that's a massive jump, and that's a massive progression in itself. Then keeping those 3 days as you go, then you may increase the distance on those days. And you were starting with 5k run to walk, you may do 6k. And then you may be able to, as I said, progress where you're running for longer and you're resting for a less amount of time, and do it that way. So increase volume, so increase the time you're working for, and increase the frequency. Use those two things, because again, we want to be working in that aerobic zone, but we want to be doing that more frequently for probably maximum results. Make the last thing you adjust, and again, there's always someone that's going to disagree with that, but from my point of view, the last thing you're going to adjust is the intensity. So maybe you've been doing 3 days of that low aerobic work for a few weeks or a few months, you feel way fitter. Then you may do 1 day at like a higher heart rate zone, where you go, okay, now I'm going to run 80%, or you might run more towards your what's called maximum lactate threshold. So there's don't want to confuse people too much, but there's a equation where you can calculate that. If you know your maximum heart rate, then you may know, you can calculate the intensity just before you start to excrete lactic acid or that process, or feel a burn, and then you can run just at that maximum threshold, and that's increasing the intensity. And then you may look at in time, then really, for example, you may then run like a K at like 90%, rest for the same amount of time, and suddenly now you're working at a really, really high intensity. But my recommendation, especially for my Gen Pop people, stick with the lower threshold work, and then increase the distance, the time, and then the frequency first. Forget about trying to run for times when you're starting off, because everything's not conditioned. And then when you increase the frequency, it's a big jump, so you're asking your muscles and those tissues, and then we need to condition, you're asking them to do more work. So see how that is, and then slowly progress over time using frequency and volume. And I think and obviously too much of anything is a bad thing. So when I think of running, obviously there's David Goggins where he's out running marathons, and that's not good either. Like there's always a sweet spot. You don't need to run crazy distances, and actually that may be counterproductive to your goal because it's too much of a stress. So don't try do all these people where they're running marathons on the daily or half marathons. You don't need to do that. What else do I have here that can be of benefit? And obviously then that's when people talk about like runner's high. I have one client in particular which says, Sean, I just really love running. So I said, okay, let me look into it a little bit further and make sure you're doing it properly. And so I always just have her voice in my head talking about runner's high. And it's interesting enough, we'll get into it maybe another day, but it's kind of, it's not the endorphins what we thought before, but it's more that endocannabinoid system, which is the same system where people smoke cannabis, and that's, I don't think endorphins can cross the blood-brain barrier or go into your brain, but that system can. And like specifically for running and exercise, it is, what's the name of it? Anandamide, and that's what runners high get, and that's why it's to get like an anti-anxiety, stress reducing, pain decreasing, potentially low rate depression, exercise induced high. That's what that is, that like brief, deeply relaxing state of euphoria as it's been described. So obviously then you get into other massive benefits, getting a vitamin D hopefully, being outdoors in nature, which is cortisol reducing in itself, fresh air, etc. So yes, there we go. And obviously being able to run then from a movement perspective, it's functional when we do it properly. We're stretching out, and this can go deeper. We will say this for another day. The fascia again, which the system which encompasses the muscles, kind of webs that runs diagonally across the body. We're training that because when we move, we're moving one shoulder, one arm forward, one hip back. So we're training our fascial system, and we're keeping these more elastic properties. And elasticity is one of the components of being youthful. So we want to keep these tissues in that condition to be able to move, run, jump. When we get to the stage, don't just start off doing that before you have the base, because then you'll hurt yourself. But when we can, I think that's very, very beneficial, especially like your Achilles, which it can be a fast twitch thing, involves in running and jumping. And as we get older, we lose a lot of these elastic properties. So for example, we trip when we're older, and we don't have those fast twitch and elastic properties to be able to catch yourself and have the strength to be able to hold yourself upright. So yes, it's kind of, as I said, just a normal, natural movement in a sense. And that is my long-winded answer and discussion on running. Hopefully that was beneficial. I think you've seen me here going for an hour 10. We did unload for the Kairos for a little bit, but that was definitely warranted. in my opinion. So yes, please share that to maybe your runner friends or people getting back into it. As I said, look out for the product, which I'm excited to release in the new year. It's definitely going to help a lot of people. And yes, if you enjoyed that episode, go over to iTunes or Spotify. Please leave me a rating and review, a good one, and I will be deeply happy. And as always, make sure you're just sending me a message on Instagram what you thought of the podcast, which is your more favorite episodes, any topics you like to for me to cover or people to get on, because I always interact with everyone that messages me. So yes, go obviously also check out our website livelongperformance.com and look out for some of the coaching programs which we will launch in the new year also. So there you go, rounding out that podcast. Hope you enjoyed that one. I can't wait to hear your feedback, and I will talk to you all in the next episode.